I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today and the importance of the lands which we each call home. My name is Karen Yamada, Chief Learning Officer for C21 Canada, Canadians for Learning and Innovation. And it is my distinct pleasure to welcome everyone to today's webinar, A Culture of Wellbeing to Support Mental Health, the sixth in a series of school system leader webinars commemorating C21 Canada's 10th anniversary. Today's panel features 5 Canadian education system leaders from C21 Canada's CEO Academy professional cohort. From coast to coast, in British Columbia, from the Surrey School District, Superintendent of Schools and CEO Jordan TINNEY. From Alberta, Superintendent Kurt SACHER from Chinook's Edge School Division in Innisfail. From Quebec, Dee Finn, Director General of the Lester B. Pearson School Board in Montreal. From Nova Scotia, Gary Adams, Executive Director for the Chignecto-Central Centre for Education in Truro. And from Newfoundland, Anthony Stack, Director of Education for the Newfoundland and Labrador English School District. Moderating today's panel is Denise Andre, a CEO Academy alumni and retired Director of Education from the Ottawa Catholic School Board. Denise is currently the Executive Director of the Eastern Ontario Staff Development Network and a Senior Administrator Portfolio Lead for the School Mental Health Ontario. Welcome, Denise, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Karen, and good morning or good afternoon to all who are joining us today. It's a pleasure to be moderating this esteemed panel. As Karen mentioned, this is a very timely topic to be dealing with well-being and support for mental health. As a matter of fact, just this morning, I was on a province-wide webinar with all of our mental health leads and mental health lead teams from across Ontario in looking at what Ontario will be doing next year from the School Mental Health Ontario point of view. So again, it's become a big part of my work in retirement and certainly is very much a passion of mine. So I'm really looking forward to what our panelists have to say today. And so we'll start us off on the West Coast with Jordan TINNEY. So over to you, Jordan.
Thanks very much, Denise. It's great to be here. Always appreciate the invitation. Aiswale, everyone. And we come to you from the traditional unceded territory of the Kwantlen, Katzie, and Semiahmoo First Nation out here in Surrey. And so it's my pleasure to kick things off. And the question that was put to us was, what sorts of proactive measures exist to address wellness in daily programming and offer access to mental health support? And I just thought I would answer this in 3 quick parts, given that we were given 180 seconds to do this, 3 minutes, which is good. I want to talk about what do we believe about wellness and mental health. I want to talk about where are we as a district putting our focus and how are we strategically pursuing that focus. And so I'll start with our beliefs. And that is that wellness and well-being in the context of education means that the children we are serving and raising to be educated, we want them to be caring citizens, of course, caring not only for themselves, but for others. And it means that we once again need to acknowledge what we've always known, which is that you cannot disconnect learning from safety and a sense of belonging. So we've known this for a long time. So that's why I use the Aristotle quote of educating the mind without educating the heart is no education at all. It's true, absolutely, and we know this. So for us, this is seen through our priority practices in our district that include social and emotional learning at the heart. So Karen, on to the next slide, please. So we also believe that our teachers and our support staff, our principals and our vice principals will never be able to design welcoming and engaging learning environments if they are not well themselves. So chose the Eleanor Brown quote, "You cannot serve from an empty vessel." I'm sure many people have seen it. We need our teachers, again, our education assistants, our principals, our vice principals, all who work in our buildings to be calm, self-regulated models for healthy living. And this means that if we want that, we actually have to teach these skills to them explicitly. So as a district, we have a goal that is well-being, and then we embark upon setting upon or enabling the structures that actually make that happen. And so now I want to talk about those structures. The next one, Karen, please. So we are, as a district, building a foundation on social emotional learning. And again, this is not just for our students, but for our adults as well. It shows this quote: the loftier the building, the deeper the foundation must be, the deeper must the foundation be laid. Because I've heard people say so many times that social emotional learning is something that, you know, oh, just another thing to add to the plate. And for us, it isn't something that gets added to the plate. It actually is the plate. We cannot learn if we don't feel safe or we don't feel we belong. And we cannot teach these children strategies if we're not confident in ourselves. So we have numerous structures in the district, from deeply embedded mentorship programs with regional leads to social emotional school leads who work directly to support the strategies in schools. Our entire framework as a district is built around CASEL's framework, the Consortium for Academic and Social Emotional Learning. And that framework is supported by assessments out of UBC from Kim Schonert-Wright called the Early Developmental Indicator, the middle years, so that we know how our students are doing. And then we use that evidence to inform and direct our programs. So very briefly, from our guiding values and our vision as a district to our district focus to strategic interventions, well-being is at the heart of our work. So thank you, Karen.
Thanks, Jordan. And now we'll move to Kurt in beautiful Alberta.
Good morning in British Columbia. Good afternoon everywhere else across Canada. Thanks for joining us today. I just wanted, if you could move to the next slide, I got a little picture there. You can see my daughter's arm sneaking through. It's about 20 years ago. And my son, Julian, I think he would have been about 7 at the time. And so I start with this picture because it's impacted me as a leader in a number of ways. First of all, I've always been deeply committed to health and wellness as a key component of a thriving school division. And like Jordan mentioned earlier, it's connected in so many ways to the learning environment. You can't separate it from the learning environment. The adults need to be well, the kids need to be well. And so when I look at my son, unfortunately, he passed away a couple of years ago. At the age of 27. And so, you know, just blessed with that time with him, but his passing was tragic, it was traumatic, and it has elevated my level of commitment towards health and wellness across the jurisdiction. Every opportunity, every interaction, is there a way to do even more in that area? That's who I am, and that's how I hope to lead. So if you could just go to the, excuse me, the next slide. So when we talk about a formula, for us in our jurisdiction, you're going to see lots of similarities to Jordan in British Columbia and Surrey. But our formula for success is it starts with the board, the superintendent, and the leadership team that I surround myself with. And we really believe in, you know, Fullen wrote a book a while back, 6 Secrets for Change. The first secret for change is love your employees. And we genuinely care about our people. All 9 board members, our entire leadership team, and they see it in our actions, that it's authentic, it's real, it's genuine. And so throughout our organization, we perpetuate, we foster, we commit to relationships matter at every level of the school division. It doesn't matter where you go. When we think about our formula for success, we think there are 3 key components. You know, when I go back to my son's situation, I received, you know, in the journey of grief that I've been going through the past couple of years, the school division was amazing. The support that I got back from the people, Homewood Health, I kind of joke that you guys can phone Homewood Health if you work here. And I said, I still have a job. And it helped me. But the school division was there, whether it was Homewood Health or the people in it or the culture in it, to support me through my journey. The schools themselves have their own unique, precious culture, and they support me so much as I move forward with my journey. And so as a school division, there's that. But then when it comes to doing the work of grieving and getting better and being who I want to be, I have a personal responsibility to take that on. And so when we talk about health and wellness across the school division, particularly with our adults, the school division has a responsibility, and we're owning that, and we take feedback on that. Schools and school cultures have a responsibility. And then we say, with all due respect, the individual, the personal component, they need to take personal responsibility, for their own wellness, whether it's getting enough sleep, exercise, nutrition. And when all of those pieces come together, you have adults who are well, who can serve the kids. When we move forward, we believe communication is at the core of a healthy and well school division. And so when we do that, we do it in an authentic and real way. We're, not superficially. And so one of the most powerful groups that we have is we have an opinion leader teacher in every one of our 42 schools. And we bring them together 4 times a year, and they can ask us anything. We have a question box, not unlike a calm classroom here in Alberta, where a kid could ask anything. And so they ask us and we give it to them straight. And these opinion leaders are typically a teacher that's been there for 10 years, who they're not afraid to tell me that, hey, look, you guys, you're losing your way on this. And we listen to them. And then conversely, going the other way, we say, okay, well, here's the truth. Here's what we're trying to do. Can you take it back to the school? And they take it back authentically. And people listen to them because they're opinion leaders. And that moves communication forward, so we minimize what we call teeth grinding in the staff room. And it really helps us so that our people are happier when they interact with children and youth. That is so critically important. I mentioned Homewood Health. The phone number is available. It's a counseling service in multiple areas, and it helps people. We have a benefit provider, Alberta School Employee Benefit Plan, and we have creative partnerships with them to help our people on disability and so on. In every one of our schools, we've designated another teacher leader to be a wellness champion. And our people services department, they coordinate that group and they help us move that agenda forward. We just finished talking to them about, can you help us in inviting people to take personal responsibility for wellness, but can you share and steal ideas in schools? And can you help the division be even better at supporting our staff? So one key way that we support our staff as a school division is with weekdays till 6. And you're like, well, what is that? That's it. It's an email request that we made. And yes, we just asked everyone in the school division that, if you want to work after 6, like, we're encouraging you to spend time with your family, and we want to have protective hands around our people. And so if Kurt decides he wants to work at 8 o'clock, that's fine, but Kurt doesn't need to send an email to everybody at 8 o'clock saying, look at me, I'm working and you should too. And I'm going to get 3 paragraphs of a response, when if I schedule send for the next morning, I might just get 1 paragraph of response. And we're more efficient. We don't have that email energy. And by the way, we don't do the email thing on the weekends either. And you might say, well, that sounds pretty simple. It is very simple. It's been incredibly powerful, and it didn't cost a dime. So I highly recommend it to any jurisdiction that wants a win. It's a high leverage strategy. I mentioned our matters committees. What I didn't mention was, in addition to having teachers, and we have just a powerful group there, we do a very similar strategy with our support staff across the jurisdiction. We just engaged with students on Monday and again on Thursday. We have a group of them that help guide us and interact, and then administrators have their version, and we have a version with parents. And it's just to keep us all healthy and well. The last thing I just wanted to mention is, when we talk to our school division, our board supports us in having 3 goals that, we stick to, and we're not changing them on the fly, because we want people to be well and focused. And the first one, academic excellence. The second one, around career connections. Our third one, we just finished saying to administrators this morning, it's in bold. And it's social, emotional well-being for not only staff, but students. And we have a number of strategic efforts that we're taking there to make sure that our kids are well. But as Jordan mentioned so eloquently earlier, we can't help our kids be well if we're not well. And so you'll find a deep commitment in our actions in how we're helping our staff to be well. There's lots more, but I think I'm using up Gary's time. So I've seen him mad before. I don't want to go too far down that road. Thanks, Karen.
Thank you,
Denise.
Kurt. Yes. Thank you, Kurt. And there's so many things that are bubbling up in my mind as you're both speaking, but I want to maybe make sure everybody has their time, and then we'll come back and revisit some of these things. And I do want to say to you, Kurt, thank you for sharing the personal story, starting us off with that, which I think we all have personal stories, and yours was certainly obviously one that has continued to guide your work as a leader. So thank you for that. Very moving and very touching. I'll turn things over to Cindy now at the Pearson School Board in beautiful Montreal.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. So I live, work, and play on the unceded territory of the Gunyahaga people, which also known as the Mohawk people. And so it's a pleasure to be here today and talk to you a little bit about some of the things we're talking about in schools in Quebec. And I will say that, you know, we knew this before the pandemic, but traditionally school has always been about cognition and learning. And the pandemic's arrival was a harsh reminder that learning is compromised and that growth is actually hampered if safety and security is in, question. And so we started using this phrase a lot, saying, we need to Maslow before we bloom. We need to understand those basic safety needs. Scott Barry Kaufman talks about looking at, safety, being there first and then moving into a growth mode. And so the basic needs, like we learned during the pandemic, food, shelter, social needs, belonging, relationship, connection, all of that was very, very important. And it's only when we can get those things solidified that we can start to talk about what should be happening in schools. So that growth, the curiosity, the exploration, the passion, the purpose. And so in our district, we focused on these fundamentals, especially last year during the shutdown. We said we need to make sure everyone's feeling okay, that they're connected. And as we started, we resumed school in August. Everyone came back full time, no option to stay home. So everyone was expected back. And that just meant people were bringing a lot of their anxieties, bringing a lot of their concerns to school as we were trying to manage this pandemic. On the next slide, if we could move to the next slide, please, Karen. What we decided to do in our district was really talk about, the context. So who's the most vulnerable? And that was very important for us because we realized not everyone was managing the pandemic in quite the same way, that some of the students we had concerns about prior to are the ones we continue to be concerned about, and other students sort of popped up on our radar. And it led us to talk about, relationships. So who's connected, who belongs, who's the meaningful adult in this child's life? Can we fix that if there isn't one? That also led us to talk a little bit about who's coping and what can we do if they're not. So that whole idea about psychoeducation. So we focused a lot in our district, especially last year, we put out a lot of information, postcards, digital sort of infographics for parents, for teachers, things to look out for, ways to talk with children about how they were feeling, how they were coping. And really, we wanted to get a better sense of who's doing okay and how can we continue that work, but how do we hone in on those students who are not doing okay? And we know from looking at some of the on trauma, especially if you look at natural disasters like Hurricane Katrina or even the 9/11 disaster in the US, that not all students are affected in the same way. Not all young people will be traumatized in the same way, and we need to better understand that. And so then that led us to do some things a little differently. And if we move to the next slide, I can share, basically our strategy came down to how do we access mental health supports with two primary vehicles. One being, let's use the teams that exist. All of our schools are fortunate. We have psychologists in every school. In my district, we're very fortunate that our psychologists are there weekly and they don't just do testing. So we had people on the ground able to listen and intervene with the most, greatest concern. But certainly our teachers, our paraprofessionals, they were all there working together as a team to say, who are we concerned about? And if that's out in the building, that's good to know too. Let's take care of the adults. As it was said before, if we don't take care of the adults, we can't take care of the children. And I would say the other thing we really focused on was really leveraging technology, especially since we knew everyone was home. We did a lot of parent webinars. We did a lot of outreach to teachers saying, do you want to have a quick lunch and learn webinar together? We can talk to you about what stress looks like in the classroom. We can talk to you about your own wellness. And we've been doing a lot of work in our district over the last year and a half on taking care of the adults. So how do our employees access their wellness, physical, mental, spiritual, all dimensions, and how can we help them? So really by taking this team approach and using as much technology as we can, as we were home last spring, and even now, as we have certain classes closed due to COVID, bubbles being closed temporarily, we're really making sure we stay connected through every means possible. So I've gone over my time as well, so I'll stop there and pass it back to
Thank you,
Denise.
Cindy. And so far, I've heard a thread that all districts are not just focusing on student mental health, but also on the adult mental health. And the adult mental health definitely does mediate student mental health. So that intersectionality is so important. So it's great to see that you're focusing on that. All right, over to you, Gary.
Thank you, Denise, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm happy to join you today from Halifax in the heart of Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. So, of course, without question, relationships and close attention to well-being, both in terms of our students and our adults, has been a priority for all of us as we navigate this pandemic. This first slide that I put up highlights that we felt very fortunate in Chignecto to have a Thrive and Achieve system improvement plan that had already elevated the conversation and the focus on student well-being so that it is seen as an integral whole and not a side conversation for sure. So our Thrive and Achieve system improvement plan builds also on a regional strength of incorporating the principles of restorative approach and relational theory. And we've organized ourselves so that as we approach this work, we do so in a very integrated way, so that our school climate and relational work is interconnected with our work around being more culturally responsive, incorporating UDL, and also increasing an understanding by our teachers on how to apply trauma-informed practices within their daily practice. Next slide, please, Karen. Thank you. So I also wanted to highlight two foundational documents, both guiding our long game, if you will, and the short games. So the long game is the inclusive education policy, which is a new, it was implemented this year in Nova Scotia, and it's really viewed as an umbrella policy that guides all of our work. In that and developing a back to school plan during the pandemic, of course, the focus was to meet students where they were and work from an asset-based mindset to carry them forward. So as we implemented the inclusive education policy and referenced constantly as we developed back to school plans, that gave Nova Scotians an ability to know what they could expect from public schools, whether delivery in the short term was going to be in person, at home, or hybrid. And of course, recently we are delivering from home, although feeling very fortunate that we were able to have our students in school up until the end of April. One of the key pieces I would highlight in this that really has guided a lot of our recent work in terms of well-being and mental health is the multi-tiered system of supports that is a framework strengthened through the inclusive education policy. Next slide, Karen. So partnerships and collaboration have truly been a cornerstone of our work every year, but certainly this year. And we've benefited from some very strong partnerships with our regional counterparts in health. So as our inclusive work and health partnerships have strengthened, we've connected more with community, engaged them in analysis of information such as EDI and MDI data, which helps us understand developmental assets and the needs in a local context. During the spring lockdown last year, as we came to understand the disproportionate impact that these challenging times were having on some of our communities, these partnerships truly allowed us to be more nimble, more responsive in a number of ways, including exploring new ways to help address issues of food insecurity, mental health issues, and in terms of educational delivery, understanding digital connectivity issues as well. And of course, sadly, last year, I'm sure folks will recall the mass tragedy that we experienced in Nova Scotia in April. It was a huge impact to the entire province and certainly saddened the country. For us in particular, this was especially impactful in our region. We lost a student, we lost a teacher, families, neighbors, and friends. Having established the networks, however, of support and collaborative partnership with mental health, they were essential in terms of helping us to be very creative within the lockdown parameters to ensure that folks had the additional supports that they needed. And these successful strategies were also built upon once again this past month when we anticipated the impact of the anniversary and had a very comprehensive plan for support. Once again, a plan carefully informed by the expertise from our partners in health. So thinking in terms of multi-tiered frameworks, our staff meet regularly as an integrated team in each of our family of schools with local representation. So we have at the table education, schools plus, mental health and addictions, justice, and community services. At the classroom level, thinking tier 1, classroom supports are viewed with less of a caseload management mindset and more emphasis on the notion of focusing on what's necessary for one or some, knowing that that will be good for all. So teachers are increasingly seeing themselves as owning the universal supports, and will look to a psychologist, for example, to help design and deliver a program rather than focus most of the time on assessment referrals. That allows us to have a service mindset that's now one of wrapping around with therapeutic programming rather than a push out approach. Next slide. Highlight the student well-being toolkit because there has been a lot of professional development in the last year. And one of the pieces we were very proud of was to put a lot of focus through the summer months preparing to support teachers as they came back to the classroom. We were constantly reminding folks to start first with thinking about relationships and the focus on well-being. And this toolkit developed in that framework of an MTSS way of approaching the work allowed them to understand more deeply and have meaningful strategies for both universal, targeted, and intensive levels of support. And the final thing, Karen, if you will, to go to the last slide, I'd like to highlight this. Because we acknowledged the social justice issues that have been so impactful on a global scale in the past year, and recognized that for many students who may have struggled to connect in the early days of the lockdown, struggling to express their feelings and have opportunities to process what was going on, we wanted to make sure we gave space and support to student voice and elevate that this year. And we also recognize the need to support staff in understanding and successfully addressing racist behaviors and other social injustice. So the region has a history of running a campaign for social justice known as Stand Up, Speak Out. We've done that for a number of years, and each year there's a particular focus. Last year, we started an ally focus, and we extended that this year, continuing the conversation around allyship, and developed a curricular unit that spanned grades 7 to 12 to help this conversation extend into the classroom for all. And at the same time, provided professional development sessions delivered to engage all of our employees, regardless of role or employee group, during dedicated time in January when the students had an extended break. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Well, a lot happening in Nova Scotia. Tony, let's hear what's happening in Newfoundland.
All right. Oh, thanks, Denise. That's 4 hard acts to follow. I'll try to do my best. Apologize for the lighting. And I'm committing a crime here by lowering the blinds because this is from a place where we've had the record rainfall this spring, going back 150 years. So the fact that there's a yellow disc out there that's barely recognizable and I'm closing it out is criminal. But anyway, apologize for the lighting variations. Just a couple of graphics. This is on the left. This is I guess a schematic of our strategic plan. And on the top, it says student engagement and success. Now, before this most recent iteration of strategic plan, you would have just seen student achievement. But greatly informing our practice has been a recognition that engagement and well-being are inextricably linked, and is a deliberate focus on new pedagogies for deep learning in partnership with Worldwide Consortium with Michael Fulham. That's really helped push us along. So that's a big change. In the bottom left, you see that would have been before just mental and physical health. But we really wanted to put upfront equity, which is really important for everybody's well-being and inclusivity, health in general, and of course, well-being. The other one, organizational effectiveness, hasn't changed in probably 15, 20 years. But anyway, that really focuses us and focuses our work. The other graphic is, many people might recognize this because our province is part of the Pan-Canadian Joint Consortium for School Health. So we're talking here about equitable access for learning opportunities, learning environments that are designed to promote well-being. And finally, partnerships are so critical for building capacity within our system. And those two graphics are constantly referred to and guide us in our work. I got a next slide, Karen. So, a wordy slide here, but again, the focus is on liberating our teachers to be design engaging opportunities, and heavy emphasis on relationships, on the deep learning that I mentioned, and giving them the tools to be able to work this out at their classroom level. And you see in subsequent slides, but greatly supported by another different initiatives. Next slide, please. Try to be conscious of the 3 minutes. So again, the ships underpinning everything. We have safe and inclusive itinerants, and they don't just pop into schools and work with classrooms. They are really enablers for teachers. They work closely with principals and our teachers to, again, capacity build. We have another partnership with the school health promotion liaison consultants. They actually work, we got 4 regional health authorities in the province. These are employees of the health authority, but they're embedded with us as liaison people, and to great advantage. We've leveraged them on overall mental, physical well-being, and it's been a great relationship. Interrupted slightly when they pulled them to do contact tracing during the pandemic, but otherwise working really well. We have one individual called an active school coordinator, and this is more about physical wellness, who works mostly with teachers and our program specialists in promoting active classrooms throughout all aspects of the curriculum. Of course, our guidance counselors and our educational psychologists, big reliance there. And of course, during the pandemic, ever more important, we grouped them together actually and created our own hotline from when we were last year, when we were completely in a virtual mode, and then resurrected this year. And it was a group of volunteer guidance counselors that would respond 24/7 to any teacher or any student concerns. And that worked very well. And we have comprehensive school health behavioral itinerants as well. And again, this is a unique group. And the focus there really is on looking after providing the capacity building for the teacher to support the student behavior problems that we're having. So it's not fix the child, it's fix the environment around the child so that they can succeed. Next slide, please. So a number of other different things for prevention and early response. Again, our guidance counselors, psychologists are heavily focused away from testing, and I've heard that reflected in some of our earlier speakers, and more about real-time support to students. We've got these youth outreach workers that come from various agencies that we enable to be interactive in our classrooms. Initially, when it started, it was a bit problematic because they were brushing up against some of the responsibilities, and there were some union issues with that, but we've greatly improved that, and it's working quite well. Another one, and this I believe was borrowed years ago from Ontario, Positive for Student Success. So these are teachers that we have embedded in our system that's only role is to credit rescue and rescue students that have dropped off our system. And they work, we've got data to show that hundreds of students that have otherwise been lost and outside of our system have been rescued and brought in and sustained throughout the last number of years. So again, a really solid investment that helps us in the area of wellness. The other one is leveraging, again, coming back to partnerships. Sometimes there can be a bit of an abrasive relationship with external players like the Child Youth Advocate. But in this case here, we had really constructive conversations with the Child Youth Advocate around the attendance issue, chronic absenteeism, leveraging the support of children, seniors, and social development, justice, to really tackle this problem from a joint perspective. And we're moving forward in that area. Next slide, please. So next steps, obviously, you can always continue to build capacity within our system to address concerns. It's been challenged during a pandemic period, for sure. One thing is clear to all of us is that if you're we are focused on learning, but we rather focus on well-being and learning. And I would argue it's more about well-being than learning. And this is something that we really emphasize, particularly during a pandemic with our school system. I know that Gary addressed it, the real importance of relationships. And we like to say relationships, particularly during the times when we had students that were out of school, that maintaining that connectivity and that emotional support and that peer support was so important. Another area that we know we need to focus on is data. So we make data-driven decisions around school indicators on mental health and well-being. So strides with that in collaboration with our department, our Ministry of Education, but it's an area that we need to improve on. Essentially, really what we want is developing those strong circles of care with other agencies in support and being open to that and sharing information and data in a collaborative environment. And I must say, the pandemic, again, there's lots of silver linings during the pandemic. Well, one of the forcing functions has been a greater relationship and understanding with our health partners. And this is accelerating now. I guess just a final comment, and I've heard it echoed throughout the presentations. We all need to look after ourselves too. This has been a trying year on all of us at the executive level in school systems. And I like what I heard about everything's done at 6. That's perfect. We try to do that ourselves, but I know I'm guilty of letting go sometimes, particularly when during some crisis points during this pandemic. And those are things you're going to have to do operationally, of course. But, you know, I look around sometimes and I leave the office and the parking lot is empty and it's past 6 o'clock. And I go, I'm not being setting a very good example here. So that's something that I've tried to look at personally in the last little while. But yeah, wellness is so important. We made great strides these last number of months under trying circumstances. But on the positive side, it has been a catalyst for real change. Thanks, Denise.
Thanks, Tony. Well, there's no doubt when we look at what are some of the organizational conditions that support student mental health and staff and student well-being, as well as mental health and well-being. Your leadership commitment to that is beyond reproach, and certainly a variety of ways that you've demonstrated that. And so what I'd like to ask the panelists now, I guess we'll invite you to maybe just weigh in as, you know, perhaps you want to see this, but what are some of the actions you see, both from the point of view of perhaps do you see schools as protective for student and staff well-being, the actual returning to schools? Is that a good place, and how do you ensure that's going to happen going forward? And what do you see as we, obviously the pandemic has shone a lens, but you've shown that on some of the challenges, that you've shown such a rich, I guess, plan or decision-making is really guided by this. How is that going to continue coming out of the pandemic and in light of policies perhaps within your province? So I've thrown a lot out there, but if there's anything you can weigh in on around what you see as next steps, and perhaps where you can ensure that schools continue to be those protected places for students and staff mental health and well-being.
Denise, since I'm recently unmuted, I could start. One of the things is there's been a lot of chatter in parent groups and some of the correspondence we received about learning loss. And we realize we've been one of the more fortunate jurisdictions, but still, you know, we've been challenged. Right now, we have half of our high school students, or most of our high school students, on half time. We're in a hybrid model where they're in one day face to face, and then the next day they're virtual, and that presented a whole lot of challenge. But there's an apprehension out there in order for, particularly, and I speak now for high school, but in general for all, just how challenged we are with reassuring parents who are afraid of post-secondary, who are afraid of the next grade level. And I've read many articles now about the wrong-headedness, if I would, about focusing on that learning loss. You know, it's more about meeting where they are, but we need to be able to find a way to reassure parents. I've reached out to our post-secondary institutions here. We've done some common messaging around reassurance. You know, the preoccupation, I call it academic obsession in the words of Fulham. You know, we really need to demonstrate that the things we are doing by focusing on wellness are important, and demonstrate that to our political masters as well as the general public. But I would be honest to say that sometimes it's a bit of a hard sell when, you know, the parent that has a student that's focused on doing really well in chemistry is challenged during this environment. And yes, academics are important, but wellness and the ability to learn is more important, more paramount.
Yeah, if I could jump in there, I think we've come to this understanding. We always knew, those of us working in the field, we know that entire children come to school. The whole child, the whole learner is so critical. And as Tony points out, sometimes we focus in on the academic growth at the expense of other things. And I think we have an opportunity here to come back to that broader view. And I know one of the things that I see happening, and it's not necessarily by design, but it's sort of an organic thing that's emerged from, you know, early on when we had our students return in the fall. People were so afraid about COVID. Our teachers got very creative about trying to stay outdoors as much as possible. And then people started connecting dots and saying, you know, this will help us with our indigenizing of education. We know the importance of the natural world. We've had some schools create outdoor classrooms, others are creating outdoor gardens, and they were on this path before the pandemic, but I really see it accelerating, partly out of necessity. As I say, teachers are trying to, even in the winter, they're like, okay, we'll just bundle up and we'll go learn outside and we'll take a walk. And that's good. And it's important to connect that back to parents and say, it's not just custodial. It's not just we're trying to find things to occupy your child's time and keep them safe. That's how they learn and grow. And play is so important, especially at the younger years. And I really see a big returning to this willingness. And the students are telling us they like this too. They understand the technology. They live it more than we do. And some of them are grateful for the break to say, okay, today it's screens off. We're going for a walk outside, or we're going to create a classroom outside, and we're going to do something, or we're going to go do a community service project. So we're going to go rake leaves for an hour. And that's as much about giving as it is about helping ensure the students' well-being. So I see that as a very positive avenue to continue to explore as we move forward to really capture and use the natural world as part of our learning classroom.
I'll jump in, Denise. I think Tony mentioned learning loss was on a conference call last week, and there was a lot of pushback on the term because people started acknowledging that we come from a place potentially where we view the system as it was as being whole and perfect and working for all learners. But there were a lot of learners for whom the system before COVID did not work. And there are a lot of students that have thrived. And I'm not saying all students, but they changed the term to learning exposed, which was an interesting change because, you know, well, what have we learned about the pandemic and what do we know now moving forward? And I think, you know, the topic is apropos because I agree as well, Cindy, you know, we're seeing some really remarkable things, a resurgence in outdoor learning, a resurgence in people getting outside, a new empowering with technology that we've never seen before, the ability to connect with people nationally, internationally. Look at what we're doing today. Now it's just the norm, right? We just do this, and we record it. So if you want to watch it anytime, go for it, share it. Like there are a whole bunch of new things happening. But I think when we come back, one of the things we will have to pay attention to is is a desire around this narrative around back to the basics, like, oh, we need to make up for lost time. And when I think, I think about, Gary, your story of the tragedy your province went through, and, trauma lives on, and COVID has descended upon people in different ways. And I think there is a time needed for healing. I'm not sure what that looks like, but just a time to come to understand what has happened to us and with us and for us, and how we learn from that and move forward. That's why I think paying attention to the thing Tony said as well, well-being then learning, I think that's going to be a great place to start in the fall.
Thanks, Jordan. I'll build on that, Denise. I mentioned that when we're talking in terms of inclusivity, that we have often described this year what's necessary for one or some, but good for all. And another phrase we've used at leadership tables is necessary during the pandemic, but good to carry forward. And so, we too are trying to think in terms of, let's not be too hasty to go back to the good old days, which in many ways weren't that good for some. And thinking of that, how we anchor this in terms of making sure that the well-being conversation doesn't become once again siloed, that it is an integrated concept, and that we don't see it as that dichotomy and the pendulum swinging back and forth as we lose attention and then regain attention. So anchoring that in some solid evidence-based research that connects it and anchors us well to push back on those temptations to go back to basics. And we've also been thinking in terms of connecting and integrating the ideas is referencing research such as Castle's recent research on transformative SEL as a lever for equity, and making sure that we're paying attention to being culturally responsive and how important that is in the larger conversation of well-being for certainly for some of our students, but good again for all. So just wanted to make those points.
I can add a few, Denise, if that's okay. I think for our school division, much like what you've already heard, we'd certainly anticipate learning gaps. It does seem logical that there'll be more because of COVID, but I think we also need to assess them very carefully so that we know exactly what we're talking about. But our first priority will be to reconnect the people. Great classroom teachers collect their students at the beginning, they collect them at the end of the day. When we move into next fall, we want to collect our people and really make sure we've got well-being as a top priority, and that it's embedded in how we move forward with the learning. So if you find a student who has a significant gap, we don't want them, being bored to tears with 4 months of review as an approach to kind of bring them back up to speed. We want to use a progressive approach. The other thing we're recognizing as we move into next year, we just went through an exercise where we mined for COVID gold. Through all this pandemic, what did we learn? That, and teachers use incredible flexibility to accommodate a learning need. And it's so how do we build on previous learning strategies that we've always used to flex and help kids? Because we've always had learning gaps. That's not different. It's just they're probably going to be enhanced going into the next year. So how do we use what we used to use and do it well and continue and have some sense of normalcy? Like, let's get back into a good routine. But like Gary was mentioning, we don't want to throw out what we just learned. There's some tremendous gold in how we had to respond to COVID, and something as simple as having, in our jurisdiction, the use of Google Classroom, and a family takes off for a holiday in the middle of the year. We can leverage technology differently. We're in a large rural jurisdiction with interesting weather, maybe not so much like Tony out there in Newfoundland, but we do get our challenges with weather. And so we can leverage technology to help reduce learning gaps when kids can't make it to school for whatever reason. So what's the best we can do with all of this? And let's use the processes we already had embedded in our jurisdiction to address learning gaps. And yet as a system, let's be open to the fact that we may uncover through data some new learning gaps, some profound ones in certain areas, and then systemically, how do we respond and support our people? So that's what we'll be after.
I've written down a lot of great nuggets from all of you. And when I think of the work you have and the year you've had, I know, as Tony mentioned, that as the senior level executive members of your districts, you've had tremendous challenges. And yet you take the time, again, showing and living that leadership commitment. And I think giving ourselves permission to ask ourselves, how am I? Asking our colleagues, how are you? You know, what is everybody has a unique story, a unique COVID story, and modeling that. And I think, as Jordan said, being very explicit about that modeling allows then our staff, our school leaders, and then of course our teachers and educators and staff to do the same. And it really does begin with senior leadership. And so we truly exemplify that. And I think at this time we have a special one of my fellow alumnus who's going to be joining us to thank our panel. So I believe that Guy Tetro will be joining us as
Bonjour.
There he is. Hi, Guy. Over to you.
Okay, I was expected to, and I don't know how I'm going to do this. I was going to do a thank you for each one of my former colleagues, but there's too many good points under each one of you. So I think one of the questions that was asked is this being videotaped, and can people watch it later? Definitely it is. I need to thank every one of you. When we at C21, before we had created the CEO Academy, we were talking about how can we get support and really promote new education in the 21st century. And we came up with the idea of having this CEO Academy. I think the biggest trick right now, one of you today again, is how do we find ways in which we can collect all of these fantastic ideas and these fantastic programs that are going forward, and put them into one place where people can go listen to these things and try and pick the pieces that would fit back in their own school division. How do we do that? So we need to continue this important work. Certainly, I think the thing that came through very, very clear is relationship is the key word. We realized how important relationships were during this pandemic. The social emotional learning skills, that Jordan kicked off our talk today with, and every one of you supported that, is the pandemic highlighted how important that is. We knew it was always important, but it's really come to a head as this pandemic over the last 14 months has taken us down. So another word that seemed to come up with every one of you in today's talk was the word partnership, relationships and partnerships. And so how do we use partnerships better so that we are not only concentrating on our own, but we're actually looking at the country, and we're looking at that. There's some prime examples that have started. I know the Royal Bank of Canada provided some pretty good funding to Sun West School Division to develop a wellness course. I think each year they donated over 100,000 for 2 or 3 years. And I'm sure if you were to check in with Randy Emerson, there's an opportunity to get a program that was developed that can be given to teachers, and teachers can either use it to teach with their own students, or students can go right to that. That's one example. So maybe I'm still sitting on the C21 board, and I'm going to push the rest of our group to maybe look at how can we go after some of the partnerships in business and industry that would help us as educators do the kinds of things that we know we could do better. And one of the things we need to do is find ways to share. How do we share all of these things and get them into spots? So I'm going to commit myself, and I'll talk on behalf, hopefully, of Karen and Robert and David, that we're going to look at that and see, are there some ways we can get people together and get these things into a repository that anybody could have access to at any time. So I'm going to leave it at that. I was going to go through each one of you and highlight your points, but you're going to have to go back to the video and have a look at that, because there's just so much there. Fantastic job, folks. Stay safe. And I wanted to say to Tony, where you've had all this rain, well, for Kurt and I here in Alberta and my homeland friends in Saskatchewan, it's been the opposite. We haven't had much moisture. In fact, one of the least amounts of moisture all winter. And today, my brother, who's just an hour north of me here at Pigeon Lake, sent me a picture, and there was a foot of snow. And so we got snow, and it's like 4 degrees here in Red Deer now, and feels like 0. So enjoy the rain. We need it back here. Stay safe, everyone. Thank you.